Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a comprehensive hearing conservation program, including noise monitoring, engineering controls where feasible, and appropriate personal protective equipment, is significantly more cost-effective in the long run than solely relying on the cheapest available personal protective equipment to mitigate noise exposure risks. As a certified safety manager, CSM, operating under U.S. OSHA regulations, which approach best fulfills the organization's legal and ethical obligations to prevent noise-induced hearing loss. Option A. Purchase the least expensive, readily available hearing protection devices for all potentially exposed employees and mandate their use without further investigation into noise sources or exposure levels. Option B. Investigate and implement only the most advanced and expensive engineering controls for all identified noise sources, regardless of the immediate financial impact, to ensure absolute noise reduction. Option C. Focus solely on administrative controls, such as rotating employees through high-noise areas to reduce individual exposure time, while deferring any capital expenditure on engineering controls or PPE. Option D. Conduct a thorough noise assessment to identify exposure levels and implement a hierarchy of controls, prioritizing engineering and administrative solutions before resorting to appropriate personal protective equipment, and ensuring a robust hearing conservation program is in place. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough noise assessment to identify exposure levels and implement a hierarchy of controls, prioritizing engineering and administrative solutions before resorting to appropriate personal protective equipment, and ensuring a robust hearing conservation program is in place. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial implications of noise control measures against the long-term health and legal consequences of inadequate protection. A certified safety manager, CSM, must demonstrate a thorough understanding of regulatory requirements and ethical obligations to protect worker health, even when faced with cost pressures. The decision-making process must be grounded in a proactive, risk-based approach rather than a reactive, cost-minimizing one. The correct approach involves a comprehensive noise assessment and the implementation of a hierarchy of controls, prioritizing elimination and substitution, followed by engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, personal protective equipment, PPE. This aligns with the fundamental principles of occupational safety and health management, as mandated by regulatory frameworks such as the Occupational Safety and Health Administration (OSHA) in the United States. OSHA General Duty Clause requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Specific noise standards, e.g., 29 CFR 1910-95, outline permissible exposure limits, PEL, and require employers to implement a hearing conservation program when noise levels exceed certain thresholds. Ethically, a CSM has a duty to protect workers from foreseeable harm, and failing to adequately control noise exposure when feasible and cost-effective would violate this duty. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cheapest available PPE without a proper assessment of noise sources and exposure levels fails to address the root cause of the hazard. This approach is ethically deficient as it places the burden of protection primarily on the employee and may not provide adequate protection if the PPE is not properly selected, fitted, or maintained, or if the noise levels exceed the protection offered by the PPE. It also likely violates regulatory requirements for a comprehensive hearing conservation program, which includes noise measurement, engineering/administrative controls, and training. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only engineering controls that are prohibitively expensive, without considering less costly but effective alternatives, demonstrates a lack of practical problem-solving and may lead to non-compliance due to inaction. While engineering controls are preferred, regulatory frameworks often allow for a combination of controls, and a CSM must explore all feasible options within a reasonable cost framework, considering the long-term costs of hearing loss claims and potential litigation. This approach fails to meet the regulatory obligation to implement effective controls, even if they are not the most expensive. A professional decision-making process for similar situations involves 1. Hazard identification and risk assessment. Conduct thorough noise surveys to identify sources, measure exposure levels, and assess the risk to workers. 2. Regulatory review. Understand and apply relevant national and local occupational safety and health regulations, e.g., OSHA standards in the U.S. 3. Hierarchy of controls. Systematically evaluate and implement controls, starting with elimination/substitution, then engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally PPE. 4. Cost-benefit analysis, holistic. Consider not just the upfront cost of controls, but also the long-term costs of noncompliance, including medical expenses, lost productivity, legal fees, and reputational damage. 5. Worker involvement. Engage workers in the process, as they have valuable insights into their work environment and the effectiveness of controls. 6. Documentation and review. Maintain detailed records of assessments, control measures, training and program effectiveness, and regularly review and update the program. Question 2. Governance review demonstrates that the organization's safety management system, SMS, policy is robust, but the implementation of new safety procedures across all departments is lagging due to significant resource constraints, including a reduced safety team budget and limited personnel availability. The safety manager must propose a strategy to address this implementation gap. Which approach best balances regulatory compliance, ethical responsibility, and practical feasibility? Option A. Focus exclusively on implementing new procedures in departments with the lowest identified safety risks to achieve visible, quick successes and build momentum for future implementation. Option B. Prioritize the implementation of new procedures in departments identified as having the highest safety risks, developing a phased rollout plan that leverages existing resources and seeks incremental budget increases for critical areas. Option C. Assign the complete implementation of all new procedures to a single, experienced safety officer, providing them with minimal additional support, but emphasizing the urgency of the task. Option D. Implement all new safety procedures across all departments concurrently, reallocating existing personnel to cover the workload and deferring other non-critical safety initiatives. Correct answer is B. Prioritize the implementation of new procedures in departments identified as having the highest safety risks, developing a phased rollout plan that leverages existing resources and seeks incremental budget increases for critical areas. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in safety management systems, SMS, implementation, a disconnect between documented policy and practical application, exacerbated by resource constraints. The professional challenge lies in balancing the imperative of robust safety procedures with the reality of limited personnel and budget. Effective judgment requires understanding the interconnectedness of SMS elements and prioritizing actions that yield the greatest safety benefit while remaining feasible. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased, risk-based implementation of new procedures, prioritizing areas with the highest identified risks. This aligns with the planning and implementation elements of an SMS. By focusing on high-risk areas first, the organization ensures that its limited resources are directed towards mitigating the most significant potential hazards, thereby demonstrating a commitment to continuous improvement and due diligence as required by regulatory frameworks. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes the well-being of personnel by addressing the most critical safety concerns first. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing all new procedures simultaneously without regard for risk or resource availability is a recipe for failure. It overburdens the safety team and operational staff, leading to rushed implementation, potential errors, and a lack of genuine understanding or buy-in. This approach fails to demonstrate effective planning and can result in a superficial implementation that does not genuinely improve safety, potentially violating the spirit of regulatory compliance. Focusing solely on low-risk areas to achieve quick wins, while seemingly productive, neglects the core purpose of an SMS, to manage significant risks. This approach fails to address the most critical safety gaps and can lead to a false sense of security. Ethically, it prioritizes perceived progress over actual safety enhancement, potentially leaving personnel exposed to greater dangers. Delegating the entire implementation to a single individual without adequate support or oversight is an abdication of responsibility. This places an unreasonable burden on one person and is unlikely to result in comprehensive or effective implementation. It demonstrates a failure in the organization and planning elements of an SMS, and is ethically questionable due to the lack of adequate resources and support for a critical safety function. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach SMS implementation challenges by first conducting a thorough risk assessment to identify critical areas. This assessment should inform a prioritized implementation plan that allocates resources strategically. Regular communication and engagement with all stakeholders, including frontline staff, are crucial for buy-in and effective execution. The process should be iterative, with ongoing evaluation and adjustments based on feedback and performance data, ensuring that the SMS remains relevant and effective in managing risks. Question 3. Regulatory review indicates a need to address potential ergonomic risks in a manufacturing facility that has recently implemented a new assembly line process. Management is concerned about the initial cost of implementing recommended ergonomic improvements, such as adjustable workstations and automated material handling. They have suggested a phased approach, focusing initially on employee training and stretching exercises. The promise to consider engineering controls only if a significant increase in reported MSDs occurs within the next fiscal year. As the certified safety manager, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance and protect worker health? Option A. Focus solely on administrative controls, such as job rotation and work rest schedules, as these are generally less expensive to implement than engineering solutions. Option B. Advise management that the current approach is acceptable as long as all employees are informed of the potential ergonomic risks and encouraged to report any discomfort. Option C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive ergonomic risk assessment, develop a prioritized plan for implementing engineering controls, and present a business case to management highlighting both regulatory compliance and the long-term cost savings of MSD prevention. Option D. Implement the suggested employee training and stretching programs as a first step, and monitor MSD incident rates closely, deferring further action until a significant increase is observed. Correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a comprehensive ergonomic risk assessment, develop a prioritized plan for implementing engineering controls, and present a business case to management highlighting both regulatory compliance and the long-term cost savings of MSD prevention. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial pressures of a company with the long-term health and safety obligations mandated by regulatory frameworks. The Certified Safety Manager, CSM, must navigate the ethical imperative to protect workers from foreseeable harm against potential resistance from management focused on cost containment. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not only compliant, but also ethically sound, prioritizing worker well-being. The correct approach involves a proactive and data-driven strategy to identify and mitigate ergonomic risks. This aligns with the fundamental principles of occupational safety and health regulations, which place a duty of care on employers to provide a safe working environment. Specifically, it requires a thorough risk assessment, the implementation of engineering controls as the primary means of mitigation, followed by administrative controls and personal protective equipment if necessary. This systematic approach is not only a regulatory requirement, but also an ethical obligation to prevent musculoskeletal disorders, MSD, and their associated human and economic costs. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings over comprehensive risk assessment and control would be ethically and regulatorily deficient. Failing to conduct a thorough risk assessment means the employer is not fulfilling their duty to identify hazards, leaving employees exposed to preventable injuries. Implementing only administrative controls or PPE without first exploring engineering solutions is often insufficient and can be seen as a superficial attempt at compliance rather than a genuine commitment to worker safety. This approach neglects the hierarchy of controls, which is a cornerstone of effective safety management and is often implicitly or explicitly required by regulations. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring action until a significant number of MSDs occur is reactive and unacceptable. Regulations typically require employers to take proactive measures to prevent hazards, not merely to respond to incidents after they have happened. Waiting for injuries to manifest demonstrates a failure to uphold the duty of care and can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions, as well as severe human suffering. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements for ergonomics and MSD prevention within the relevant jurisdiction. 2. Conducting a comprehensive ergonomic risk assessment to identify all potential hazards. 3. Prioritizing control measures according to the hierarchy of controls: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. 4. Documenting all assessments, control measures, and training. 5. Communicating findings and recommendations clearly to management, emphasizing both the regulatory obligations and the benefits of a safe workplace. 6. Advocating for the necessary resources to implement effective controls, even if it requires challenging short-term financial considerations. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that the Certified Safety Manager, CSM, is tasked with developing a comprehensive training program to effectively identify training requirements. Which of the following methodologies best aligns with regulatory compliance and proactive hazard mitigation? Option A. Reviewing general job descriptions and assuming that employees understand the inherent risks associated with their roles. Option B. Conducting a detailed analysis of each job task, identifying associated hazards, and then determining the specific knowledge, skills, and abilities required to perform those tasks safely. Option C. Prioritizing training based on the number of safety suggestions submitted by employees over the past year. Option D. Focusing training development solely on the most frequently occurring types of workplace incidents. The correct answer is B. Conducting a detailed analysis of each job task, identifying associated hazards, and then determining the specific knowledge, skills, and abilities required to perform those tasks safely. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a safety manager to move beyond a superficial understanding of job roles and delve into the specific hazards and tasks associated with each. Failure to accurately identify training needs can lead to significant safety lapses, regulatory noncompliance, and potential harm to personnel. The core of the challenge lies in translating broad job descriptions into actionable training requirements that directly address risks. The correct approach involves a systematic analysis of job tasks and associated hazards to determine specific training needs. This methodology ensures that training is targeted, relevant, and effective in mitigating identified risks. Regulatory frameworks, such as those enforced by OSHA in the U.S., mandate that employers provide training that is adequate to ensure the safety and health of their employees. This approach directly aligns with the principle of proactive risk management and compliance, ensuring that training addresses the what and how of safe work practices in relation to identified hazards. An approach that relies solely on general job descriptions without a detailed hazard analysis is flawed because it fails to identify the specific risks employees face. This can lead to training that is too broad, misses critical safety protocols, and therefore does not meet regulatory requirements for hazard-specific training. An approach that prioritizes training based on employee requests alone, without an objective assessment of job tasks and hazards, is also problematic. While employee feedback is valuable, it may not encompass all potential risks or align with the employer's legal obligations to identify and mitigate hazards. This can result in training gaps and a failure to address systemic safety issues. An approach that focuses only on the frequency of incidents without a thorough task and hazard analysis risks addressing symptoms rather than root causes. While incident data is important for identifying problem areas, it does not, by itself, define the specific training needed to prevent future occurrences. A comprehensive training needs assessment must link hazards to tasks and then to the required competencies and knowledge. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, multifaceted approach. First, thoroughly review job descriptions and operational procedures. Second, conduct a detailed hazard identification and risk assessment for each job task. Third, cross-reference identified hazards with existing training programs and employee competencies. Fourth, develop or procure training that directly addresses the identified gaps, ensuring it is compliant with relevant regulations. Finally, establish a system for ongoing review and evaluation of training effectiveness. Question 5. The control framework reveals a near-miss incident involving a forklift operator and a pedestrian in a high-traffic warehouse. The immediate cause appears to be the operator not observing a blind corner. However, a comprehensive investigation is required to determine the underlying factors. Which of the following approaches best aligns with best practices for incident investigation and reporting under U.S. OSHA regulations? Option A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis using multiple investigation techniques, document all findings, and submit a detailed report to OSHA within the required timeframe. focusing on systemic issues beyond the operator's immediate actions. Option B. Conduct a brief interview with the operator and supervisor. Assume the operator's inattention was the sole cause, and file no report with OSHA since no injuries occurred. Option C. Focus the investigation solely on the operator's training records, and if they are in order, conclude that the incident was an unavoidable anomaly and no further action is needed. Option D. Issue a written warning to the forklift operator and consider the incident closed, as no injuries occurred and the operator acknowledged their mistake. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis using multiple investigation techniques, document all findings, and submit a detailed report to OSHA within the required timeframe, focusing on systemic issues beyond the operator's immediate actions. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical incident that requires a thorough investigation to prevent recurrence. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands not only the identification of immediate causes, but also a deep dive into systemic issues that allowed the incident to occur. The pressure to quickly resume operations can conflict with the need for a comprehensive and unbiased investigation. Careful judgment is required to balance operational demands with the ethical and regulatory imperative to protect worker safety and comply with reporting obligations. Correct approach involves a systematic root cause analysis, RCA, that moves beyond superficial causes to uncover underlying systemic deficiencies. This includes employing multiple investigation techniques, such as the 5 whys, fault tree analysis, or fishbone diagrams, to explore contributing factors. The investigation must be documented meticulously, and a detailed report submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies within the mandated timeframe, adhering strictly to the reporting procedures outlined by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, in the United States. This aligns with OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm, and with specific OSHA reporting requirements for certain incidents. An incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the immediate actions of the individuals involved without exploring the broader organizational context. This superficial investigation fails to identify systemic weaknesses, such as inadequate training, faulty equipment maintenance, or poor supervision, which are often the true root causes. Ethically and regulatorily, this approach is unacceptable as it does not fulfill the employer's responsibility to prevent future incidents and may lead to repeat violations. Another incorrect approach is to delay or omit reporting the incident to OSHA. This is a direct violation of OSHA regulations, such as those requiring immediate reporting of fatalities, severe injuries, and amputations. Failure to report can result in significant penalties and undermines the regulatory framework designed to ensure workplace safety. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a cursory investigation that relies on anecdotal evidence or assumptions without employing structured RCA techniques. This can lead to inaccurate conclusions about the incident's causes, resulting in ineffective corrective actions. This approach fails to meet the professional standard of due diligence in safety management and can be seen as a breach of the employer's duty of care. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve establishing a clear incident response plan that includes immediate containment, notification of relevant parties, and the formation of an investigation team. This team should be trained in RCA methodologies and empowered to conduct a thorough, unbiased investigation. The process should prioritize gathering factual evidence, analyzing contributing factors systematically, and developing robust corrective and preventive actions. Finally, adherence to all regulatory reporting requirements must be a non-negotiable step, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 6. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of chemical exposure incidents due to outdated safety data sheets, SDS, and inconsistent labeling practices across the facility. The Certified Safety Manager, CSM, needs to optimize the hazard communication process to mitigate these risks. Which approach best addresses this situation while adhering to regulatory requirements? Option A. Mandate that employees review all SDS for chemicals they might encounter annually, without specific training on how to apply this information to their daily tasks. Option B. Immediately procure updated SDS for all chemicals and distribute them to department supervisors, assuming they will ensure proper labeling and employee awareness. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all SDS to ensure they are current and readily available. Update all container labels to accurately reflect the hazards identified in the SDS, and implement a revised training program that includes practical exercises on interpreting SDS and labels for specific job tasks. Option D. Focus solely on relabeling all chemical containers with generic hazard pictograms, as this is the most visible aspect of hazard communication. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all SDS to ensure they are current and readily available. Update all container labels to accurately reflect the hazards identified in the SDS, and implement a revised training program that includes practical exercises on interpreting SDS and labels for specific job tasks. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to balance regulatory compliance with practical implementation of hazard communication, specifically concerning safety data sheets, SDS, labeling, and employee training. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the information provided is not only compliant, but also effectively understood and utilized by employees to prevent incidents. A deep understanding of the regulatory framework is essential to avoid costly fines, legal liabilities, and most importantly, worker injuries. The correct approach involves a systematic review and update of the hazard communication program, ensuring all SDS are current and readily accessible, labels accurately reflect hazards, and training is comprehensive and tailored to employee roles and the specific chemicals they handle. This aligns with the fundamental principles of OSHA Hazard Communication Standard, HCS, which mandates that employers provide employees with information about hazardous chemicals in their work environment. Specifically, 29 CFR 1910-1200 requires employers to develop, implement, and maintain a written hazard communication program. This includes ensuring that containers of hazardous chemicals are labeled, SDS are available, and employees are trained on the hazards and protective measures. The ethical imperative is to protect worker health and safety through effective information dissemination. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on updating SDS without verifying label accuracy or the effectiveness of training fails to meet the comprehensive requirements of the HCS. Labels are the primary means of immediate hazard identification, and if they are inaccurate or outdated, employees may not take appropriate precautions. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes labeling over ensuring SDS accessibility or providing adequate training overlooks the critical need for detailed hazard information and proper understanding of safe handling procedures. Training must go beyond simply presenting information, must ensure comprehension and the ability to apply that knowledge. Another incorrect approach might be to assume existing training is sufficient without assessing its effectiveness or relevance to new or changed chemical hazards. This neglects the requirement for ongoing training and the need to address specific workplace exposures. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured approach. First, identify the specific regulatory requirements, e.g., OSHA HCS. Second, assess the current state of the hazard communication program against these requirements. Third, prioritize actions based on risk and regulatory mandates, focusing on areas with the greatest potential for harm or non-compliance. Finally, implement, monitor, and continuously improve the program to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 7. Research into the onboarding process at a new manufacturing facility reveals that new hires are provided with a brief overview of general safety rules by their direct supervisor, with the expectation that they will learn specific safety procedures through on-the-job observation and informal guidance from experienced colleagues. Which approach to providing new employees with safety information and training best aligns with regulatory compliance for a certified safety manager operating under U.S. OSHA regulations? Option A. Rely on supervisors to verbally convey essential safety information during the initial days of employment, assuming employees will pick up the rest through observation. Option B. Provide a generic safety manual that all new hires are instructed to read independently, without any formal training sessions or verification of comprehension. Option C. Implement a formal, documented safety orientation program that includes comprehensive training on job-specific hazards, safe work practices, emergency procedures, and the proper use of PPE, with mechanisms to verify employee understanding. Option D. Allow new employees to begin performing their duties with minimal safety instruction, with the understanding that formal safety training will be provided at a later, unspecified date. The correct answer is C. Implement a formal documented safety orientation program that includes comprehensive training on job-specific hazards, safe work practices, emergency procedures, and the proper use of PPE, with mechanisms to verify employee understanding. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a safety manager to balance the immediate need to onboard new employees efficiently with the absolute regulatory mandate to provide comprehensive safety information and training. Failure to do so can lead to immediate safety incidents, significant legal penalties, and reputational damage. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the speed of onboarding does not compromise the thoroughness and effectiveness of safety training, which is a non-negotiable requirement. The correct approach involves a structured and documented safety orientation program that covers all relevant hazards, safe work procedures, emergency protocols, and the use of personal protective equipment, PPE, specific to the new employee's role and work environment. This approach is mandated by regulations such as OSHA General Duty Clause 29 CFR 1910-132, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm, and this includes providing adequate training. Furthermore, specific standards within OSHA, like those for hazard communication, 29 CFR 1910-1200, require employers to inform employees about chemical hazards and protective measures. A documented program ensures accountability and provides evidence of compliance in case of an inspection or incident. An incorrect approach that relies solely on informal verbal instructions from a supervisor fails to meet regulatory requirements because it lacks structure, documentation, and standardization. This method is prone to omissions, inconsistencies, and the supervisor may not be adequately trained or aware of all relevant safety protocols. This directly violates the spirit and letter of regulations, requiring employers to ensure employees understand and can implement safety procedures. Another incorrect approach, which provides generic safety information not tailored to the specific job tasks or workplace hazards, is also deficient. While it may touch upon general safety principles, it fails to address the unique risks an employee will face, thereby not fulfilling the employer's duty to protect them from recognized hazards specific to their role. This is a failure to provide relevant and effective training as required by standards like those for machine guarding, 29 CFR 1910-212, or lockout/tagout, 29 CFR 1910-147, which demand task-specific training. Finally, an approach that delays comprehensive safety training until after the employee has begun performing tasks without adequate supervision or prior instruction is highly negligent and directly contravenes the principle of proactive hazard control. This creates an immediate and unacceptable risk of injury, violating the employer's fundamental obligation to ensure a safe working environment from the outset. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve prioritizing regulatory compliance and employee well-being over expediency. This means developing a robust, documented safety orientation program that is integrated into the onboarding process. The program should be role-specific, cover all applicable regulatory requirements, and include methods for verifying employee comprehension. When faced with time constraints, the safety manager should advocate for allocating sufficient resources and time for effective training, rather than compromising on safety standards. This involves clear communication with management about the legal and ethical implications of inadequate safety training. Question 8. To address the challenge of a safety management system, SMS, where the Plan Do Check Act (PDCA) cycle is not effectively integrated into daily operations, leading to a lack of continuous improvement, which of the following strategies would best foster genuine engagement with the PDCA cycle and enhance safety performance? Option A. Prioritizing the development of extensive new safety procedures and documentation within the plan phase, with the expectation that these will naturally lead to improved safety outcomes. Option B. Implementing the PDCA cycle as a distinct, one-time project to address specific safety concerns, followed by a transition to standard operational procedures. Option C. Empowering frontline workers to actively participate in the check and act phases by providing them with the necessary tools and authority to identify hazards, report near misses, and propose corrective actions. Option D. Concentrating efforts on management-led audits and reviews to fulfill the check and act requirements of the PDCA cycle, ensuring comprehensive oversight. Correct answer is C. Empowering frontline workers to actively participate in the check and act phases by providing them with the necessary tools and authority to identify hazards, report near misses, and propose corrective actions. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in implementing a safety management system, SMS, where a critical component, the Plan-Do-Check-Act, PDCA cycle, is not fully integrated into the organization's daily operations. This lack of integration makes continuous improvement a theoretical concept rather than a practical reality, undermining the effectiveness of the SMS. The professional challenge lies in identifying the root cause of this disconnect and proposing a solution that fosters genuine engagement with the PDCA cycle, ensuring it drives tangible safety enhancements. Careful judgment is required to move beyond superficial compliance and embed the principles of continuous improvement into the organizational culture. The correct approach involves actively engaging frontline workers in the check and act phases of the PDCA cycle by providing them with the tools and authority to identify hazards, report near misses, and propose corrective actions. This empowers them to be active participants in safety improvement, directly addressing the check phase through their observations and the act phase through their suggestions. This aligns with the fundamental principles of a robust SMS, which emphasizes worker participation and the iterative nature of improvement. Regulatory frameworks, such as those underpinning the Certified Safety Manager (CSM) certification, mandate a proactive and participatory approach to safety management, recognizing that those closest to the work are best positioned to identify and address risks. Ethically, it is imperative to involve those most affected by safety risks in their mitigation. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on management-led audits and reviews for the check and act phases. While audits are important, this approach neglects the invaluable insights from frontline personnel and creates a top-down system that may miss critical operational hazards. This failure to actively solicit and incorporate worker feedback represents a significant gap in the check phase and hinders effective act phase interventions, potentially leading to non-compliance with regulations that require worker consultation and participation. Another incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the plan phase by developing extensive new safety procedures without ensuring their practical implementation and review. This results in a document-heavy SMS that lacks practical application and fails to achieve continuous improvement. It ignores the do, check, and act components, rendering the PDCA cycle incomplete and the SMS ineffective. This approach is ethically questionable as it prioritizes procedural development over actual safety outcomes and is likely to fall short of regulatory expectations for a functioning SMS. A third incorrect approach would be to treat the PDCA cycle as a one-time event rather than an ongoing process. Implementing a new safety initiative and then moving on without systematically checking its effectiveness and acting on findings defeats the purpose of continuous improvement. This fundamentally misunderstands the iterative nature of the PDCA cycle and will prevent the organization from achieving sustained safety performance, failing to meet the spirit and intent of regulatory requirements for an evolving SMS. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves first understanding the specific organizational context and identifying where the PDCA cycle is breaking down. This requires observation, data analysis, and open communication with all levels of the organization. The next step is to select interventions that directly address the identified gaps, prioritizing those that foster worker engagement and promote a culture of continuous improvement. Finally, it is crucial to monitor the effectiveness of implemented solutions and be prepared to adapt and iterate, embodying the very principles of the PDCA cycle. Question 9. Analysis of an organization's safety culture reveals that senior management frequently attends safety committee meetings, approves safety budgets, and publicly states the importance of safety. However, frontline employees report feeling hesitant to report minor safety concerns due to a perceived lack of follow-up and a focus on production targets over safety interventions. Which approach best evaluates the effectiveness of leadership commitment and safety culture in this scenario? Option A. Evaluate the visible actions of leaders in addressing reported safety concerns, the clarity of safety communication, and the integration of safety into performance metrics beyond just incident rates. Option B. Review the number of safety training sessions conducted annually and the compliance rates for mandatory safety procedures. Option C. Measure the number of disciplinary actions taken against employees for safety violations and the overall reduction in lost time injuries. Option D. Assess the frequency and attendance records of safety committee meetings and the allocated safety budget. Correct answer is D. Assess the frequency and attendance records of safety committee meetings and the allocated safety budget. Explanation. This scenario presents a professionally challenging situation because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to evaluate the effectiveness of leadership commitment to safety within an organization, a core component of a robust safety culture. The challenge lies in discerning genuine commitment from superficial gestures, which directly impacts the organization's ability to prevent incidents and comply with regulatory requirements. Careful judgment is required to assess observable behaviors and their alignment with stated safety objectives, as well as to understand the cascading effect of leadership actions on employee involvement, communication, and accountability. The correct approach involves a comprehensive evaluation of visible leadership actions, employee engagement in safety processes, the clarity and effectiveness of safety communication channels, and the establishment of a clear accountability framework for safety performance. This approach is best professional practice because it directly aligns with the principles of establishing and maintaining a strong safety culture, as mandated by regulatory frameworks such as OSHA General Duty Clause, 29 CFR 1910, 1450, which implicitly requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards, necessitating proactive leadership and employee involvement. Ethical considerations also demand that leaders prioritize the well-being of their employees, which is best achieved through demonstrable commitment to safety. An approach that focuses solely on the frequency of safety meetings, without assessing their content or impact, represents a regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach mistakes activity for effectiveness, neglecting the substance of leadership commitment. It fails to demonstrate genuine engagement with safety issues and can lead to a perception of tokenism, undermining employee trust and involvement. An approach that relies primarily on employee self-reporting of safety concerns without active leadership follow-up and visible action is also a failure. While employee input is crucial, leadership's role is to facilitate, act upon, and visibly support these concerns. Without this, employees may become disengaged, believing their input is not valued or acted upon, which is a failure in communication and accountability. An approach that emphasizes disciplinary actions for safety violations as the sole measure of accountability, without also recognizing and reinforcing positive safety behaviors and addressing systemic issues, is incomplete. While accountability is vital, a balanced approach that includes positive reinforcement and root cause analysis of incidents is essential for fostering a proactive safety culture, rather than a reactive one driven by fear of punishment. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic assessment of leadership's visible commitment through their actions, resource allocation, and communication. It requires actively seeking and valuing employee input and involvement in safety initiatives. Furthermore, it necessitates establishing clear communication channels for safety information and feedback, and implementing a fair and consistent accountability system that addresses both positive and negative safety performance, focusing on continuous improvement and hazard elimination. Question 10. The investigation demonstrates that a chemical manufacturing facility has implemented a new process involving a volatile organic compound, VOC. To assess potential worker exposure, the safety manager is considering several monitoring and sampling approaches. Which approach best aligns with the principles of process optimization for ensuring worker safety and regulatory compliance? Option A. Relies solely on area monitoring at strategic locations within the processing area, assuming these readings will be indicative of worker exposure. Option B. Conduct personal air sampling for a representative sample of workers during various tasks and shifts, using calibrated equipment and a sampling strategy designed to capture time-weighted average exposures. Option C. Perform a single, brief grab sample at the beginning of the shift to gauge initial airborne concentrations. Option D. Utilize older, readily available sampling equipment that has not been recently calibrated, as it is more cost-effective. The correct answer is B. Conduct personal air sampling for a representative sample of workers during various tasks and shifts, using calibrated equipment and a sampling strategy designed to capture time-weighted average exposures. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to interpret and apply complex monitoring data within the context of established regulatory limits, ensuring worker protection without over-engineering controls or creating unnecessary burdens. The CSM must balance the need for accurate exposure assessment with the practicalities of implementation and the legal obligations under the specified regulatory framework. Careful judgment is required to select the most appropriate sampling strategy and interpret the results to inform effective risk management decisions. The correct approach involves a systematic and defensible method for air sampling that aligns with regulatory expectations for assessing worker exposure to airborne contaminants. This approach is right because it prioritizes representative sampling, ensuring that the collected data accurately reflects actual worker exposure over a relevant period. Regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by OSHA in the U.S., mandate that employers assess exposure levels to determine if they exceed permissible exposure limits, PEL, or other established guidelines. This requires using sampling methods that are scientifically valid and capable of providing data that can be compared to these limits. The chosen method should consider the nature of the contaminant, the work processes, and the potential for variability in exposure. An incorrect approach that relies solely on area monitoring without considering personal exposure is professionally unacceptable because it fails to directly assess what individual workers are breathing. Regulations often require personal monitoring to accurately gauge individual risk, as area samples may not reflect the higher concentrations a worker might experience in their breathing zone. Another incorrect approach that uses a single, short-duration grab sample without considering the potential for fluctuating exposure levels is also flawed. This method may not capture peak exposures or average exposures over a full shift, leading to an inaccurate assessment of risk and potential noncompliance with regulations that consider time-weighted averages. Finally, an approach that uses outdated or uncalibrated sampling equipment is ethically and regulatorily deficient. Using such equipment compromises the integrity of the data, rendering it unreliable for compliance purposes and potentially exposing workers to unmanaged risks. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the potential hazards and the relevant regulatory requirements. This involves identifying the specific contaminants of concern, understanding their toxicological properties, and knowing the applicable exposure limits. The next step is to design a sampling strategy that is representative of worker exposure, considering factors like the duration of tasks, the physical layout of the work area, and the potential for airborne dispersion. This strategy should be documented and justified. After sampling, the data must be analyzed and interpreted in comparison to regulatory limits, taking into account any limitations of the sampling method. Finally, the results should be used to implement or adjust control measures to ensure worker safety and regulatory compliance. Question 11. During the evaluation of a new chemical process involving volatile organic compounds, VOC, in a manufacturing facility, a certified safety manager, CSM, needs to implement control measures to protect workers from inhalation exposure. The VOCs have established permissible exposure limits, PEL, set by OSHA. The CSM is considering several options to manage the risk. Which approach best aligns with U.S. regulatory requirements and professional safety principles for controlling chemical hazards? Option A. Mandate the use of appropriate respirators for all employees working in the area, ensuring proper fit testing and training on their use. Option B. Substitute the current VOCs with a less volatile but still hazardous chemical that requires less stringent handling procedures. Option C. Focus on comprehensive employee training programs that detail the hazards of VOCs and emphasize safe work practices to minimize exposure. Option D. Prioritize implementing local exhaust ventilation systems to capture VOCs at the source, supplemented by clear work procedures and regular air monitoring to ensure effectiveness. The correct answer is D. Prioritize implementing local exhaust ventilation systems to capture VOCs at the source, supplemented by clear work procedures and regular air monitoring to ensure effectiveness. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge for certified safety managers, CSM, in the United States, selecting appropriate control measures for chemical hazards when faced with multiple potential solutions. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the hierarchy of controls, a fundamental principle in occupational safety and health, as mandated by U.S. regulations, primarily OSHA standards. This requires not just understanding chemical properties and exposure limits, but also the strategic application of control measures based on their effectiveness and feasibility. Careful judgment is required to prioritize controls that eliminate or reduce hazards at the source over those that rely on individual behavior or personal protective equipment, PPE. The correct approach involves prioritizing engineering controls and administrative controls over personal protective equipment. This aligns directly with OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Furthermore, OSHA-specific standards for hazardous chemicals, such as those found in 29 CFR 1910 Subpart Z, toxic and hazardous substances, emphasize the use of engineering and administrative controls to minimize exposure. The hierarchy of controls, though not always explicitly codified in every standard, is a guiding principle that OSHA inspectors and safety professionals universally apply. Eliminating the hazard or substituting it with a less hazardous substance is the most effective, followed by engineering controls, e.g., ventilation, then administrative controls, e.g., work practices, training, and finally, PPE as the last line of defense. This systematic approach ensures the most robust protection for workers. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on personal protective equipment, PPE, without first exploring elimination, substitution, engineering, or administrative controls. This fails to meet the regulatory expectation of providing the highest level of protection and can be deemed inadequate under OSHA General Duty Clause. PPE is considered the least effective control measure because it relies on proper selection, fit, maintenance, and consistent use by the employee, and it does not eliminate the hazard itself. Another incorrect approach would be to focus only on administrative controls, such as extensive training, without implementing feasible engineering solutions like local exhaust ventilation. While training is crucial, it is an administrative control and less effective than engineering solutions that physically remove or contain the hazard. Relying solely on administrative controls can be insufficient if the hazard remains present and the potential for exposure is high. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough hazard assessment, including understanding the chemical's properties and established exposure limits, e.g., OSHA permissible exposure limits (PELs) or ECG threshold limit values (TLVs) if no PEL exists. Following this, the CSM must systematically evaluate control measures according to the hierarchy of controls: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, PPE. The selection of controls should be based on their effectiveness in reducing exposure to or below acceptable limits, feasibility, and cost-effectiveness, always prioritizing the most protective measures. Documentation of the hazard assessment and the rationale for control selection is also a critical professional practice. Question 12. The evaluation methodology shows a company's workplace inspection program is being reviewed for its effectiveness. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates a comprehensive assessment of the program's ability to identify hazards and ensure their timely and effective resolution? Option A. Relying on employee feedback forms submitted after each inspection to gauge overall satisfaction with the inspection process. Option B. Analyzing a sample of inspection reports to assess the thoroughness of hazard identification, the appropriateness of recommended corrective actions, and the timeliness of their closure. Option C. Reviewing inspection logs to confirm that inspections are conducted weekly as scheduled and documenting any minor housekeeping issues noted. Option D. Verifying that all inspection checklists are completed and signed by the designated personnel, regardless of the nature or severity of the findings. The correct answer is C. Reviewing inspection logs to confirm that inspections are conducted weekly as scheduled and documenting any minor housekeeping issues noted. Explanation: The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a certified safety manager, CSM, is tasked with reviewing the effectiveness of a company's workplace inspection program. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the CSM to move beyond simply verifying that inspections are occurring and instead assess the quality and impact of those inspections. The CSM must exercise careful judgment to determine if the current process is truly identifying significant hazards and leading to meaningful improvements, rather than just a procedural check-the-box exercise. This involves understanding the nuances of hazard recognition, the effectiveness of corrective action implementation, and the overall contribution of inspections to a robust safety management system. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of inspection records, hazard identification logs, and corrective action closure rates, coupled with direct observation of the inspection process and interviews with personnel involved. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental principles of effective workplace safety management as mandated by regulatory frameworks such as OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, in the United States. OSHA General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. Regular, thorough inspections are a cornerstone of hazard recognition. Furthermore, the effectiveness of these inspections is measured by the timely and appropriate implementation of corrective actions to mitigate identified risks. A best practice approach, therefore, must evaluate both the identification of hazards and the subsequent control measures, ensuring a closed-loop system that demonstrably reduces risk. This aligns with the ethical responsibility of a CSM to proactively protect worker well-being. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the frequency of inspections, without evaluating the quality of hazard identification or the closure rate of corrective actions, fails to meet regulatory expectations. This approach is deficient because it assumes that simply conducting inspections is sufficient, ignoring the critical step of effectively addressing the hazards found. This could lead to recurring incidents and a false sense of security, violating the employer's duty to provide a safe workplace. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes documenting minor housekeeping issues over significant safety hazards overlooks the primary purpose of inspections: to identify and control serious risks. This approach is flawed because it misdirects resources and attention away from potentially life-threatening hazards, thereby failing to fulfill the regulatory requirement to address recognized hazards. An incorrect approach that relies solely on employee self-reporting of hazards during inspections, without independent verification or follow-up by management or safety personnel, is also professionally unacceptable. While employee input is valuable, this approach abdicates the employer's responsibility to actively seek out and assess hazards. It creates a system vulnerable to omissions and a lack of systematic hazard identification, which is a direct contravention of proactive safety management principles. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the safety management system's components, starting with the stated objectives of the program. The CSM should then assess how effectively the current practices align with these objectives and relevant regulatory requirements. This involves gathering objective evidence, such as inspection reports, incident data, and corrective action logs, and triangulating this information with direct observations and stakeholder feedback. The focus should always be on the effectiveness of the safety program in preventing injuries and illnesses, not just its procedural compliance. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that while an emergency action plan, EAP, exists, the frequency and variety of evacuation drills have been insufficient to adequately test the plan's effectiveness and employee comprehension. As the Certified Safety Manager, CSM, which of the following approaches best addresses these findings in accordance with regulatory requirements and best practices for emergency preparedness? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing EAP, revise evacuation procedures based on the review and current operational needs, and implement a structured drill program that includes varied scenarios and regular evaluations of performance. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for EAP review and drill execution to department supervisors without providing specific guidance or oversight. Option C. Update the EAP document with minor revisions to reflect current contact information and schedule one large-scale evacuation drill annually. Option D. Focus solely on improving the clarity of exit signage and conduct a single, predictable evacuation drill each quarter. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing EAP, revise evacuation procedures based on the review and current operational needs, and implement a structured drill program that includes varied scenarios and regular evaluations of performance. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential gap in the organization's emergency preparedness, specifically concerning the effectiveness of evacuation procedures and drills. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to not only identify deficiencies, but also to propose and implement solutions that are compliant with relevant regulations, ethically sound, and practically effective in protecting lives. The CSM must balance the need for robust emergency plans with the operational realities of the workplace, ensuring that procedures are clear, understood, and regularly tested. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and enhancement of the existing Emergency Action Plan, EAP, and evacuation procedures, followed by the implementation of a structured and varied drill program. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the audit findings by focusing on the core components of emergency preparedness. Regulatory frameworks, such as those enforced by OSHA in the U.S., assuming U.S. jurisdiction for CSM exam, mandate the development and maintenance of emergency action plans, 29 CFR 1910. 38. These plans must include clear procedures for reporting emergencies, evacuation, and accounting for personnel. Regular drills are crucial for testing the effectiveness of these plans and ensuring employees are familiar with their roles and responsibilities during an emergency. The ethical imperative is to ensure the safety and well-being of all individuals within the workplace, which necessitates proactive and validated preparedness measures. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings as minor or to implement superficial changes without a thorough review. For instance, simply updating the EAP document without validating its practical application through drills fails to address the effectiveness of the procedures. This is a regulatory failure because it does not ensure the plan is functional and understood by employees. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct drills that are infrequent, predictable, or do not simulate realistic emergency scenarios. This is both a regulatory and ethical failure, as it provides a false sense of security and does not adequately prepare employees for actual emergencies, potentially leading to increased risk and harm. A third incorrect approach might be to focus solely on evacuation routes without considering other critical elements of emergency response, such as communication protocols, assembly points, or the needs of individuals with disabilities. This is a failure to meet the comprehensive requirements of emergency preparedness regulations and an ethical lapse in ensuring the safety of all personnel. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understanding the audit findings and their implications. Second, consulting relevant regulatory standards and best practices. Third, engaging stakeholders, including management and employees, in the review and development process. Fourth, designing and implementing a phased approach to improvement, prioritizing critical elements. And finally, establishing a system for ongoing monitoring, evaluation, and continuous improvement of emergency preparedness and response capabilities. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that in industrial settings with potential exposure to dusts, fumes, vapors, and gases, the most effective long-term strategy for protecting worker health involves a multifaceted approach. Considering the hierarchy of controls, which of the following represents the most appropriate and regulatory compliant primary strategy for a certified safety manager to implement when identifying and controlling airborne contaminant exposure? Option A. Mandating the use of appropriate personal protective equipment, PPE, for all tasks where airborne contaminants are present. Option B. Focusing on comprehensive worker training programs that educate employees on the risks of airborne contaminants and safe work practices. Option C. Prioritizing engineering controls such as local exhaust ventilation or process enclosure to remove or contain contaminants at their source. Option D. Implementing strict work rotation schedules and limiting the duration of tasks known to involve higher contaminant levels. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing engineering controls such as local exhaust ventilation or process enclosure to remove or contain contaminants at their source. Explanation: This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term health and safety of workers exposed to airborne contaminants. The CSM must not only identify potential hazards, but also implement effective control measures that are both compliant with regulations and practical for the workplace. The difficulty lies in selecting the most appropriate control strategy from a hierarchy of controls, considering factors like feasibility, cost, and worker acceptance, all while adhering to the specific regulatory framework. The correct approach involves prioritizing engineering controls to eliminate or minimize the hazard at its source. This aligns with the fundamental principles of the hierarchy of controls, which is a cornerstone of occupational safety and health regulations. Specifically, regulations like OSHA, assuming U.S. jurisdiction for CSM exam context, emphasize that engineering solutions are the most effective and preferred method for controlling airborne contaminants because they reduce exposure without relying on individual worker behavior. This proactive approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes worker well-being by directly addressing the hazard. An incorrect approach that relies solely on administrative controls, such as job rotation or limiting exposure time, fails to adequately protect workers. While these methods can reduce individual exposure duration, they do not eliminate the hazard itself and can be difficult to enforce consistently. Ethically, this approach places a greater burden on the worker to manage their exposure and may not meet the feasible or effective control standards set by regulations. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on personal protective equipment, PPE, as the primary control measure is also deficient. PPE is considered the last line of defense in the hierarchy of controls. Relying on it exclusively is often less effective because its protection depends on proper selection, fit, maintenance, and consistent use by the worker. Regulatory frameworks typically mandate that PPE be used when engineering and administrative controls are not feasible or sufficient, not as the sole or primary solution. Ethically, this approach can be seen as a less robust commitment to worker safety, as it shifts the primary responsibility for protection to the individual worker. A further incorrect approach that involves ignoring the issue until a complaint is filed is a clear violation of regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Occupational safety and health laws mandate proactive hazard identification and control. Waiting for a complaint signifies a failure in the employer's duty of care and can lead to significant legal penalties, worker injuries, and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic risk assessment. This includes identifying the specific airborne contaminants, assessing the potential exposure levels and routes, and then evaluating control options based on the hierarchy of controls. Elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, PPE. The CSM should consult relevant regulatory standards, industry best practices, and expert advice to select the most effective and compliant control strategy, ensuring that worker health and safety are the paramount consideration. Question 15. The control framework reveals a critical operational task is scheduled for immediate execution, and the operational supervisor is requesting to bypass the formal job hazard analysis (JHA) process to save time, suggesting that the experienced team can manage the risks based on their knowledge. As a certified safety manager, CSM, which approach best upholds the principles of the JHA and regulatory compliance? Option A. Authorize the task to proceed, trusting the team's experience to identify and manage hazards, with a commitment to review any incidents that may occur. Option B. Halt the task until a complete JHA is performed, involving a detailed breakdown of each step, comprehensive hazard identification, and the development of specific safe work procedures and controls, followed by a pre-task briefing. Option C. Provide a checklist of common hazards associated with similar tasks and instruct the team to use it as a guide, allowing them to proceed with minimal formal documentation. Option D. Proceed with the task after a brief verbal discussion with the supervisor and team, focusing on general safety precautions and ensuring basic PPE is worn. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the task after a brief verbal discussion with the supervisor and team, focusing on general safety precautions and ensuring basic PPE is worn. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the fundamental requirement of ensuring worker safety through a robust job hazard analysis (JHA) process. The pressure to expedite a task without a thorough JHA can lead to overlooking critical hazards, potentially resulting in incidents. Careful judgment is required to uphold safety standards while collaborating with operational teams. The correct approach involves a systematic breakdown of the task, thorough hazard identification, and the development of specific, actionable safe work procedures, all documented and communicated to the affected workers. This aligns directly with the core principles of occupational safety and health management systems, which are foundational to the CSM certification. Specifically, regulatory frameworks like OSHA General Duty Clause 29 CFR 1910, 1450, in the U.S., which mandates employers provide a workplace free from recognized hazards, necessitate such proactive hazard assessment. Ethically, a CSM has a duty to protect the well-being of workers, making a comprehensive JHA a non-negotiable step before commencing potentially hazardous work. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness by skipping the detailed hazard identification and procedure development phases fails to meet regulatory requirements. This bypasses the essential steps designed to prevent incidents and demonstrates a disregard for the systematic risk management expected of a safety professional. It also represents an ethical failure, as it compromises the safety of workers by not adequately assessing and mitigating risks. Another incorrect approach that relies on the worker's assumed experience to substitute for a formal JHA is also professionally unacceptable. A worker experience is valuable. It is not a substitute for a structured hazard analysis. Regulations often require documented procedures and hazard assessments, not just reliance on informal knowledge. This approach risks overlooking hazards that may be less obvious or that workers have become desensitized to. It also fails to provide a clear, consistent, and documented safety standard for all involved. A third incorrect approach that focuses solely on providing personal protective equipment, PPE, without a comprehensive JHA is inadequate. PPE is a control measure of last resort and should be selected based on identified hazards. Implementing PPE without understanding the full scope of hazards and other potential control measures, elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, is a reactive and incomplete safety strategy. It does not address the root causes of hazards and may not provide sufficient protection against all identified risks. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the task and its context. 2. Initiating the JHA process by breaking down the task into steps. 3. Collaborating with frontline workers and supervisors to identify all potential hazards associated with each step. 4. Evaluating the severity and likelihood of each hazard. 5. Developing and documenting specific control measures, prioritizing elimination or substitution, followed by engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, appropriate PPE. 6. Communicating the JHA and safe work procedures to all affected personnel and ensuring their understanding and compliance. 7. Reviewing and updating the JHA as needed. Question 16. Investigation of a manufacturing facility reveals a variety of potential risks. The Certified Safety Manager, CSM, is tasked with developing a comprehensive hazard recognition strategy, which approach best aligns with regulatory requirements and professional best practices for ensuring a safe working environment. Option A. Prioritize the identification and control of chemical hazards, as these often pose the most severe long-term health risks to employees. Option B. Concentrate efforts on addressing ergonomic hazards such as poor workstation design to prevent musculoskeletal injuries, which are prevalent in manufacturing. Option C. Focus primarily on readily apparent physical hazards like tripping hazards and unguarded machinery, as these are the most common causes of immediate injury. Option D. Systematically identify and evaluate physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, and psychosocial hazards, considering their potential interactions and cumulative impact. The correct answer is D. Systematically identify and evaluate physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, and psychosocial hazards, considering their potential interactions and cumulative impact. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Certified Safety Manager, CSM, to move beyond simple identification of hazards to a nuanced understanding of how different hazard types interact and influence each other within a complex work environment. The CSM must apply a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and comprehensive approach to hazard assessment, aligning with the principles of proactive safety management mandated by regulatory bodies. The correct approach involves a multifaceted hazard recognition strategy that systematically considers physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, and psychosocial hazards, and then evaluates their potential for interaction and cumulative impact. This aligns with the fundamental principles of occupational safety and health management, which emphasize a holistic view of workplace risks. Specifically, regulations such as OSHA General Duty Clause, 29 CFR 1910, 1450, implicitly require employers to identify and mitigate all recognized hazards, not just those that are immediately obvious or easily categorized. Furthermore, industry best practices and professional ethical standards for safety professionals dictate a thorough and integrated approach to hazard assessment to ensure the well-being of all employees. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on readily apparent physical hazards, such as tripping hazards or unguarded machinery, fails to address the full spectrum of risks. This overlooks significant potential for harm from chemical exposures, biological agents, or the insidious effects of psychosocial stressors, which can be equally or more detrimental to employee health and safety. Such a narrow focus is a direct violation of the comprehensive hazard recognition requirements inherent in occupational safety and health regulations. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only chemical hazards, while important, neglects other critical risk categories. This selective focus can lead to a false sense of security by addressing only a portion of the overall risk profile. It fails to acknowledge that physical, biological, ergonomic, and psychosocial factors can exacerbate chemical risks or present independent threats that require mitigation. An approach that exclusively addresses ergonomic hazards, such as poor workstation design, is also insufficient. While crucial for preventing musculoskeletal disorders, it ignores the potential for acute or chronic harm from other hazard types. A comprehensive safety program must consider all recognized hazard categories to effectively protect the workforce. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured hazard identification and risk assessment methodology. This typically includes 1. Establishing a baseline understanding of the work processes and environment. 2. Systematically identifying potential hazards across all recognized categories: physical, chemical, biological, ergonomic, and psychosocial. 3. Evaluating the likelihood and severity of harm associated with each identified hazard. 4. Considering the interactions and cumulative effects of multiple hazards. 5. Prioritizing risks based on their potential impact. 6. Developing and implementing appropriate control measures. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the hazard assessment and control strategies. This systematic and inclusive approach ensures that all significant risks are identified and managed, fulfilling regulatory obligations and upholding professional ethical responsibilities. Question 17. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire to streamline safety training by consolidating specialized hazard training into a single, generalized module to reduce costs and training time. As a certified safety manager, CSM, what is the most appropriate approach to address this feedback while ensuring regulatory compliance and employee safety for high-risk activities like confined space entry, fall protection, and lockout/tagout? Option A. Select the least expensive training provider that offers a broad safety curriculum, focusing on completing training records rather than the depth or relevance of the content. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive, site-specific hazard assessment for each specialized training area and develop or procure targeted training modules that directly address the identified risks and relevant regulatory requirements, e.g., OSHA standards for confined spaces, fall protection and lockout/tagout. Option C. Prioritize training based on employee years of service, providing specialized training only to those with extensive tenure and offering generalized training to newer employees. Option D. Implement a generalized hazard awareness training program that covers common safety principles, assuming employees will apply this general knowledge to specific high-risk situations. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive, site-specific hazard assessment for each specialized training area and develop or procure targeted training modules that directly address the identified risks and relevant regulatory requirements, e.g., OSHA standards for confined spaces, fall protection, and lockout/tagout. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to balance the need for efficient training delivery with the absolute necessity of ensuring comprehensive competency for high-risk activities. Stakeholder feedback, while valuable, can sometimes prioritize perceived efficiency over actual safety effectiveness, creating a tension that a CSM must navigate. The core challenge lies in determining if a generalized approach to hazard training adequately addresses the specific risks and regulatory requirements associated with confined space entry, fall protection, and lockout/tagout procedures, all of which have distinct and stringent compliance mandates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a detailed, site-specific hazard assessment and a corresponding training needs analysis that directly maps to the identified hazards and regulatory requirements for each specialized training area. This ensures that training is not only delivered but is also relevant, effective, and compliant with applicable regulations, e.g., OSHA standards in the U.S. For confined space entry, training must cover permit requirements, atmospheric testing, rescue procedures, and attendant duties. Fall protection training needs to address hazard identification, anchorages, harness use, and rescue. Lockout/tagout training must detail energy control procedures, re-energization, and employee roles. This granular approach, driven by risk assessment and regulatory mandates, is the only way to guarantee that employees possess the knowledge and skills to perform these tasks safely and compliantly, fulfilling the CSM's ethical and legal obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that relies solely on general hazard awareness training without specific modules for confined space entry, fall protection, and lockout/tagout fails to meet regulatory requirements. For instance, general hazard awareness does not substitute for the specific knowledge and practical skills mandated by OSHA Confined Spaces Standard, 29 CFR 1910. 146. Fall Protection Standard, 29 CFR 1926 Subpart M, or Lockout/Tagout Standard, 29 CFR 1910. 147. This approach creates significant regulatory noncompliance and exposes employees to severe risks due to a lack of specialized knowledge. An approach that prioritizes the completion of training modules based on employee tenure rather than a demonstrated need or risk assessment is also flawed. While experience can be a factor, it does not automatically confer competency or ensure understanding of current regulatory requirements or site-specific procedures. This can lead to overtraining in areas where it's not needed and undertraining in critical areas, creating both inefficiency and safety gaps. An approach that focuses on the lowest-cost training providers without verifying their accreditation, the comprehensiveness of their curriculum, or their ability to deliver site-specific content is ethically and legally problematic. The CSM has a duty to ensure training is effective, not just that it is procured. Using unvetted providers can result in inadequate training that does not meet regulatory standards, leading to the same safety and compliance failures as general hazard awareness training. Professional reasoning. When faced with stakeholder feedback that suggests a more generalized or cost-driven approach to specialized safety training, a CSM must employ a risk-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Identifying the specific hazards and associated regulatory requirements for each specialized training area, confined space, fall protection, lockout/tagout. 2. Conducting a thorough training needs analysis based on these requirements and the specific work activities performed by employees. 3. Evaluating training options against these identified needs, prioritizing effectiveness, regulatory compliance, and site-specific relevance over mere cost or perceived efficiency. 4. Communicating the rationale for specialized training to stakeholders, clearly articulating the risks of non-compliance and the ethical imperative to protect employee well-being. 5. Documenting the entire process, from hazard assessment to training selection and delivery, to demonstrate due diligence and compliance. Question 18. Market research demonstrates that a manufacturing facility has identified a recurring issue with airborne particulate matter in a specific production area, leading to respiratory complaints among employees. As the Certified Safety Manager, CSM, for this U.S.-based facility, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations for addressing this occupational health hazard? Option A. Conduct a cost-benefit analysis to determine the most economical solution, prioritizing options that involve minimal disruption to production schedules and the lowest immediate expenditure. Option B. Implement a comprehensive program of engineering controls, such as local exhaust ventilation, to capture and remove the particulate matter at its source, supplemented by administrative controls like job rotation and the provision of appropriate respiratory protection. Option C. Provide all affected employees with high-efficiency particulate air (HEPA) respirators and conduct mandatory training on their proper use and maintenance, while deferring any significant capital investment in ventilation system upgrades. Option D. Focus on increasing the general ventilation of the production area by opening windows and increasing air exchange rates, and instruct employees to report any symptoms of respiratory distress immediately. The correct answer is B. Implement a comprehensive program of engineering controls, such as local exhaust ventilation, to capture and remove the particulate matter at its source, supplemented by administrative controls like job rotation and the provision of appropriate respiratory protection. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for certified safety managers, CSM, in the United States, requiring a nuanced understanding of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, General Duty Clause and specific standards. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for hazard control with the long-term implications, implementing a solution that may not be fully compliant or sustainable. A CSM must exercise professional judgment to identify the most effective and legally sound approach. The correct approach involves a comprehensive hazard assessment that leads to the implementation of engineering controls as the primary means of mitigation, supplemented by administrative controls and personal protective equipment, PPE, as necessary. This aligns with OSHA hierarchy of controls, which prioritizes elimination and substitution, followed by engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally PPE. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes worker safety by addressing the hazard at its source, and it is legally justified by OSHA emphasis on effective hazard abatement and the General Duty Clause, Section 5(a)(1) of the OSH Act, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Furthermore, specific OSHA standards often mandate engineering controls where feasible. An incorrect approach that relies solely on administrative controls and PPE without first exploring engineering solutions fails to adequately address the hazard at its root. This is a regulatory failure because it may not be considered feasible or effective by OSHA, especially if engineering controls are readily available and practical. Ethically, it places a greater burden on the employee to manage the risk, which is less protective. Another incorrect approach, focusing only on immediate temporary fixes without a long-term plan, is also problematic. While it might offer short-term relief, it doesn't demonstrate a commitment to a sustainable, safe work environment and could lead to recurring issues, potentially violating the employer's ongoing duty to maintain a safe workplace. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing cost savings over robust hazard control, is a clear ethical and regulatory failure. OSHA regulations and ethical principles mandate that worker safety takes precedence over financial considerations when addressing recognized hazards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Thoroughly identifying and assessing the hazard, understanding its root causes and potential consequences. 2. Consulting relevant OSHA standards and industry best practices. 3. Applying the hierarchy of controls, prioritizing engineering solutions. 4. Documenting the hazard assessment, control measures implemented, and the rationale behind the chosen approach. 5. Regularly reviewing the effectiveness of implemented controls and making adjustments as needed. Question 19. The review process indicates a significant opportunity to reduce operational costs by streamlining several safety reporting and training procedures. A proposal has been put forward to consolidate safety reporting forms into a single, less detailed document, and to reduce the frequency of certain refresher training sessions, citing a perceived low incidence of related incidents. As a certified safety manager, CSM, what is the most appropriate regulatory compliance approach to evaluate this proposal? Option A. Immediately approve the cost-saving measures as they are presented, assuming that reduced reporting and training will not significantly impact overall safety performance given the current low incident rates. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of the proposed changes on all elements of the Safety Management System, SMS, including policy, organization, planning, implementation, evaluation, and improvement, to ensure continued regulatory compliance and effective risk management. Option C. Implement the proposed changes on a trial basis for a limited period, and then gather feedback from a select group of employees to determine their effectiveness. Option D. Defer the decision on the proposed changes until the next scheduled annual SMS audit, as current operational demands require immediate attention to cost reduction. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of the proposed changes on all elements of the safety management system, SMS, including policy, organization, planning, implementation, evaluation, and improvement, to ensure continued regulatory compliance and effective risk management. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of robust safety management system, SMS, compliance. The pressure to demonstrate cost savings can lead to shortcuts that undermine the foundational elements of an SMS, potentially creating significant risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed changes are evaluated not just for their financial impact, but also for their potential to compromise safety performance and regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the proposed changes against the established SMS elements, specifically focusing on how they might impact policy, organization, planning, implementation, evaluation, and improvement. This approach is right because it directly addresses the core requirements of a functional SMS as mandated by regulatory frameworks for safety managers. It ensures that safety is integrated into all aspects of operations and that changes are managed through a structured process that includes risk assessment and mitigation. This aligns with the ethical responsibility of a CSM to prioritize the well-being of workers and the public, and the regulatory obligation to maintain a compliant and effective SMS. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost-saving aspect, without a thorough SMS impact assessment, fails to uphold the CSM's duty. This approach is ethically flawed as it prioritizes financial gain over safety, and is a direct violation of regulatory requirements that mandate a comprehensive SMS. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals, without a structured evaluation process, is also professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the systematic planning and implementation phases of the SMS, increasing the likelihood of unforeseen hazards and noncompliance. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to the principles of evidence-based safety management. A further incorrect approach that involves deferring the evaluation of safety implications to a later date or to another department without clear accountability is a critical failure. This neglects the continuous improvement and evaluation elements of the SMS, creating a gap in oversight and potentially allowing unsafe conditions to persist. It signifies a breakdown in the integrated nature of the SMS and a shirking of the CSM's core responsibilities. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the proposed change and its intended benefits. This should be immediately followed by an assessment of the potential impact on each SMS element. This involves consulting relevant policies, organizational structures, existing plans, implementation procedures, and evaluation mechanisms. If the proposed change has a negative impact, the CSM must then engage in a risk assessment process to identify hazards, evaluate risks, and develop mitigation strategies. This might involve proposing alternative solutions that achieve similar cost savings without compromising safety, or advocating for the rejection of the change if safety cannot be adequately assured. The process should always be documented, and communication with relevant stakeholders, including management and workers, is crucial throughout. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a critical phase of a new construction project involves tasks with a high potential for falls from elevation and exposure to hazardous materials. The project timeline is aggressive, and the site manager is pushing for immediate commencement of these activities. As the Certified Safety Manager, CSM, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and worker safety? Option A. Proceed with the high-risk activities as scheduled, assuming employees have sufficient prior experience, and address any training deficiencies only if an incident occurs. Option B. Conduct brief, informal on-the-job toolbox talks for all personnel involved in these tasks, covering the most critical safety points, and allow work to begin immediately. Option C. Verify that all personnel assigned to these tasks have current, documented training records that meet regulatory standards for fall protection and hazardous materials handling, and postpone commencement until all gaps are identified and addressed. Option D. Rely on the site manager's assurance that the team is experienced and capable, and allow the high-risk activities to commence without formal verification of specific training compliance. The correct answer is C. Verify that all personnel assigned to these tasks have current, documented training records that meet regulatory standards for fall protection and hazardous materials handling, and postpone commencement until all gaps are identified and addressed. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified safety manager, CSM, to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term imperative of ensuring a competent and safe workforce. The pressure to complete a project on time can lead to shortcuts in essential safety processes, particularly training. A CSM must exercise sound judgment to prevent potential accidents and ensure compliance with regulatory mandates, even when faced with competing priorities. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing training records and a proactive plan to address identified gaps before commencing high-risk activities. This demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance by ensuring that all personnel involved in potentially hazardous tasks have received the necessary, up-to-date training as mandated by relevant safety regulations. Ethically, it prioritizes worker well-being over expediency, an approach that relies solely on the assumption that employees are adequately trained without verification, fails to meet regulatory requirements for documented training and competency assessment. This creates a significant risk of incidents due to a lack of knowledge or skill, violating the employer's duty of care. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the high-risk activity and address training deficiencies only after an incident occurs, is a clear abdication of responsibility. This reactive stance is not only a violation of regulatory principles that emphasize proactive hazard control, but is also ethically reprehensible, as it places workers in harm's way unnecessarily. Finally, an approach that prioritizes superficial, on-the-job briefings over formal documented training programs for high-risk tasks is insufficient. While informal guidance has its place, it does not meet the rigorous standards for competency assurance required by many safety regulations, particularly for activities with inherent dangers. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and the specific regulatory training requirements associated with those risks. This involves consulting relevant standards, conducting a gap analysis of current training, and developing a phased approach to training that aligns with project timelines without compromising safety or compliance. The focus should always be on proactive risk mitigation and demonstrable competency.